Women play sports, but not on TV. Since Title IX passed in 1972, the number of women playing sports has increased dramatically. Despite this fact, however, media coverage still is far less than their male counterparts. Let's take a closer look on how women's sports might be confined to the sidelines. The Women's Sports Foundation reports that female participation in sports has increased a staggering 560% at the collegiate level. The Tucker Center at Minnesota University adds that 40% of all athletes are women and receive about 43% of college scholarships. However, they receive just 4% of media coverage. Cheryl Cookie, an associate professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Purdue University, shares the research she and her colleagues have collected over the past 20 years on televised news media coverage of men's and women's sports.
The amount of coverage has actually declined over the past 20 years, which is quite shocking and surprising for us as researchers, given the fact that women's sports has exploded in terms of participation, in terms of popularity, in terms of interest within that same time frame.
Women's sports has never been more popular, but some argue that audiences are just not interested. During the Women's World Cup, Sports Illustrated writer Andy Benoit said on Twitter that women's sports weren't worth watching and that ratings backed up his argument. Many quickly disagreed with his tweets and pointed out that the U.S. team averaged 5.3 million viewers on television, and the championship game had a sold-out crowd of 53,000 plus in Vancouver's BC Place Stadium. Mary Jo Kane, the director of the Tucker Center at the University of Minnesota, completely disagrees with the statement that people aren't interested.
And, it took me a really long time to figure out that the referent for nobody's interested are those very same sports reporters and sports editors, because there is an enormous untapped market of people who are desperately interested.
Kristina Danella, the head women's basketball coach at Caldwell University, comments on why she thinks the media doesn't cover women's sports as much as the men's side.
I think that they don't really give women's sports a chance, and they're just so into the guys' game, which, the guys' game and the girls' game is completely different. And I think if you watch women's basketball and women's sports in general, I think it's great, and it's so much different from the men's version of it.
The 2015 WNBA Rookie of the Year also adds,
"Just because we may not have the same buzz as the men's game doesn't mean our game is less valid."
Meanwhile, Rachel Blount, a Star Tribune sports reporter, thinks that the interest in women's sports has something to do with the media coverage.
And I think there is something to the argument that if there were wider media coverage of some of these teams and athletes, it would create more interest because more people would be exposed to it. And if you don't cover them, then you're perpetually in this situation of, well, there's no interest, so we don't want to cover them.
LaChina Robinson, a former Division I collegiate basketball player and now basketball analyst for ESPN and Fox, suggests fans can change the media coverage of women's sports.
By turning on the television, watching women, by telling other people about women that they see in athletics that are positive images of them being strong and shooting the basketball and out on the soccer field and all the different places they compete.
Can the media coverage of women's sports teams ever increase? Slowly but surely, female athletes will get as much coverage as their male equals. Until then, this is Serena Soriano for Media Watch.